Hello everyone, my name is Martin Kipp and I will be finishing up the presentation on Brazil following my teammates Aaron Edwards and Rodrigo Morales. As a quick overview of what I'll be speaking about, first we'll look at the Corruption Perception Index in Brazil. Then I have a graph to compare corruption against some other nations worldwide. Then we'll look at what Brazil is doing to combat corruption and what experts believe needs to be done in order to fix their problems. Finally, I want to speak about Hofstede's dimensions, first masculine versus feminine, and then long-term versus short-term orientation. So in the Corruption Perception Index, which Transparency International builds every year, a high score of 100 is a more clean, less corrupt nation, and a low score of 0 is a more corrupt nation comparatively. Brazil scored a 35, and in the past 4 years, they've scored between a 35 and 40 pretty consistently. The average score last year in 2018 was a 43. So obviously we can tell from this that Brazil is not up to par and is below many of the other nations worldwide. We see this in the graph to the right. A lighter yellow equals a higher score, and a darker red, shade of red is a low score. Comparing Brazil to the United States, we can tell that there's a little bit more corruption going on in Brazil. So to compare them a little bit more, we just want to say first that Brazil is one of the world's top investment destinations and is seen as to have a well-functioning business. That doesn't mean that there isn't a little bit of corruption there. And I want to get into that a little bit. In the graph to the right, there's a corruption versus human development graph. Obviously, the CPI, which we just spoke about, on this, 10 would be less corrupt and 1 would be more corrupt. Brazil is obviously a little bit more to the corrupt side, scoring about a 4. On the Human Development Index, which is on the y-axis, they score 0.7. They base the Human Development Index off of education levels, per capita income, and life expectancy. So New Zealand with a higher score, with corruption, with less corruption, directly correlates to a better Human Development Index. So Brazil being at a 0.4 on the or a 0.7 on the Human Development Index and a 4 on the Corruption Perception Index, they kind of sit in the midst of that. There's several nations in the middle, and don't really compare very well compared to places like the U.S., Germany, Norway, or New Zealand, who have better Human Development Index scores correlating to their the Corruption Perception Index, obviously. So obviously we want to know, what is Brazil doing to combat corruption? What experts believe needs to be done in order to fix these problems. Experts believe that electoral accountability causally affects the corruption perceptions practices of politicians in Brazil. That would mean that in communities where the mayor is reelected and is facing opponents, they have a better chance of it being a less corrupt neighborhood or community. So Brazil is taking action, and they established the Clean Company Act of 2014. It holds companies more responsible for their employees' actions and make sure that they're staying out of trouble and doing right by the community around them. So, like I said, I want to get into a little bit of Hofstede's dimensions. The first one I want to cover is masculine versus feminism, or feminine. A high score would obviously mean that it's a more masculine area, and a low score would be a more feminine score. The masculine versus feminine dimension tries to establish whether the country's culture is driven by the need to succeed in competition or the need to feel achieved. On the other hand, a country more defined as feminism in the category would prefer less competition, obviously, but also the dominant factor of that one would be the quality of life, and caring for others would be more important to them. So Brazil scored a 49, which is a very intermediate score. You'd probably see a little bit of both. Having the drive to succeed wouldn't be uncommon, and neither would worrying more about the quality of life and those around you. We can compare this kind of to U.S.'s score of 62. It's U.S.'s score. They're more driven by succeeding and probably more inclined to look for ways to get richer compared to Brazil. Next, I want to look at long-term versus short-term orientation. A high score would mean they're more long-term oriented, and a low score would be more short-term oriented. So what does this mean exactly? Long-distance orientation is explained as how every society has a maintains some links with its own past while dealing with the challenges of the present and also the future. So obviously, Brazil also scores a very intermediate score again compared to U.S.'s score of 26. Although it's more towards a low score, that means Brazil is probably more aligned with maintaining traditions inside their families and their culture, and also might be a little slow to change in society. We can see this. They're a very Catholic nation. They hold on to their values a lot more in traditions, and they take traditions and stuff like that a lot more serious. Kind of compared to the U.S. scores, they're both very short-term oriented. All that being said, I hope y'all found this to help y'all out a lot and very informative. Can't wait to answer y'all's questions.